welcome. This young man is going out to buy his very first sofa. He's talking to this salesman, and the salesperson says, well, we got lots of sofas. What are you going to use it for? And this guy says, well, when I'm not working, I spend a lot of time with my friends, gaming. The salesperson walks him over to this sofa and he goes, hey, well, this sofa, it'll easily fit you and 3 of your friends with no problem. The guy kind of pauses. He goes, yeah, show me something else. I don't have 3 friends with no problem. We all got problems. Here's another. This one's really dumb. This guy goes to the doctor. He goes, I think I got a problem here. I think I got a problem with my hearing. And the doctor says, well, can you describe the symptoms? He says, well, there's this guy named Homer, and then his wife's name is Marge. So I'm going to talk about problems and problem solving and mindfulness and how all that works together. I'd like to talk first about how mindfulness is really an amazing problem-solving tool, because it helps you see more clearly. It helps you pierce through delusion and confusion, and it can help you to cultivate new insights. But I'd also like to talk about how mindfulness is about shifting out of the box of the linear mind. The linear mind is comparing, judging, trying to figure stuff out. And intuition happens when you're suspending that. So I'd like to talk about the power of what's called reframing. Reframing is an amazing tool for getting insights into issues that are problematic. The third thing I'd like to touch on is reflecting on karma as a problem-solving tool. Karma is this law of cause and effect, and there's something very powerful about taking time to really investigate the karma around particular issues in your life. Then if we have time, I'd like to talk about maybe the most radical way that you can reframe issues in your life. So I just want to say, if you have no problems, you might want to skip this talk because it probably won't be helpful. But maybe you know someone who does have some problems, so maybe it is worth listening to this. So a jet is taxiing down the tarmac. It immediately stops and it turns around and it goes back to the gate. And after an hour-long wait with everyone kind of sitting in the cabin, it finally took off again. And a passenger asked a flight attendant and said, what was the problem? And the flight attendant responded and said, well, the pilot was bothered by a noise that he heard in the engine. And it took us a while to find a new pilot. It's amazing how good we are at pretending things aren't real. It's amazing how good we are at compartmentalizing, pretending things really aren't a problem. And eventually, of course, they become more and more chronic, and then we got issues. But I find it incredible to see the amazing power of the mind to create its own alternative reality. And so we have this antidote of mindfulness. And these 2 elemental questions that you can ask yourself at any time. The first one, what exactly is happening right now? Oh, that's a really deep question because it's very complex when you really look at it. It's simple, but not easy to really name what's happening. When you can name it, you have just developed a sense of greater wisdom. That is to say, your capacity to name what's true, not your preference, not your embellishment, not how you want it to be. But when you can name what is happening, you're naming what's true. The second question is, can you be with it? Or how are you relating to it? And this becomes a very powerful tool. Because of course, what happens is when in any given moment you ask yourself what's happening, and then you ask, can I be with it, or how am I relating to it, you will immediately see your preferences. You'll immediately see how you're pushing away, how you're trying to nuke something unpleasant, or how you're reaching for something better. And this is life. We are just reaction machines. If we don't examine our moment-to-moment experience, all we're doing is pushing away the bad stuff, grasping for what we think will be better. And in that, we're simply a pinball being bounced around. And so here's an interesting little Zen pop quiz. If you like, you can close your eyes. Not mandatory, but you might close your eyes. And let me ask you right now, what's happening right now? What is most predominant right now? And how are you relating to it? Is there any subtle sense of pushing away or holding on? Now, can you imagine, just for the next 3 breaths, not reacting, just letting things be exactly as they are? And if you like, you can deepen the breath. And if you like, you can open your eyes. This whole idea of moving out of reacting mind into more of a non-preferential quality of awareness is really quite profound, because when we're not awake, we're just reacting to life. If you take fruit flies, you put them in a jar, leave them in there for a while, and then if you take the top of the jar off, the fruit flies will continue to fly around, but never out of the jar. And isn't that an apt description of life? For example, if you have a belief installed at some point that you're not good enough, or you're not deserving enough, there's not a lot of difference between you and that fruit fly. You're flying around, but you're not aware of how you've trapped yourself, how you're limited by that belief. And this is the incredible, liberating aspect of mindfulness. So reactivity is countered by cultivating steadiness. You know, the word equanimity it's a big word in this particular tradition. Equanimity is that sense of steadiness, of non-preferential awareness. And whenever you take this seat of the observer, you begin to notice your reactivity. Noticing how you are constantly buffeted by what's referred to as the 8 worldly winds. So here you are filled with equanimity, and then here comes the wanting mind. What does the mind want? It wants success. It wants to win. It wants pleasure. It wants to be well known. It wants to be loved. On the other hand, there's the aversive mind. And what does the mind not want? Well, the mind will do whatever it can to avoid loss, to avoid pain, to avoid shame, to avoid blame. If you are not aware of the 8 worldly winds and their effect on you, you're stuck. You can have success in life, but it might be based on wanting to avoid loss and pain and shame. The freedom comes through this quality of mindfulness, the sense of self-observation without judgment, cultivating, and maybe just in little moments, this quality of non-preferential awareness. It's one of the most radical acts there is, to pause. As the Quakers say, don't just do something, sit there. And unless you pause, you're stuck in that jar, whatever you're habituated to. Which leads to the next thing I'd like to talk about, how you can change the frame of your perspective. And here it gets really, really interesting. Reframing is a very powerful practice because it'll shift you out of the fruit fly jar. I like to tell this story. I try not to tell it too much, but it's such a good illustration. So forgive me if you're familiar with this one and you've heard this a couple times. Over the years, I've followed the wonderful mystical teacher, Sri Tony Robbins Das, and gosh, this was so many years ago when I first ran across what he calls the 5 problem-solving questions. I've adapted them, I've changed them a little bit, but hats off to Tony Robbins, because this is a really, really powerful technique. And these are questions that help you to kind of reframe a problematic situation. And I use them all the time for myself. But when I first heard this and I was exploring an issue and I kind of deconstructed it, and whoa, I just had such a powerful insight. So pretty soon after I kind of learned this technology, I was at work. And at that time, I was the president of Kripalu Center, large, complex, very, very complex organization, over 300 people on staff and serving thousands and thousands of people. And we were all, kind of young and inspired and not very professional. Myself as the perfect example. But at one moment, I'm just in my office and the head of reservations just came storming into my office. And she said, "We got a problem." And so I stopped and invited her to sit down, and I asked her, "So what's the issue?" She said, "Well, the catalog just dropped. And we have more calls than we can get to. Our staff is undertrained. We're overwhelmed. We're leaving people hanging. And the flood of calls is so much, everyone's freaking out. And it's a mess and it's a disaster." So I called on these 5 questions and I asked her, I said, I totally get it. And I can imagine how challenging that is, but I just have a couple questions for you. I said, "So what's great about this problem?" And I could just see the kind of the shock in her, and she kind of looked around the room and she said, "Business is great?" I said, "Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?" "Yeah." I said, "So tell me, what's not perfect yet?" And again, this really long pause. And she said, well, what's not perfect yet is that we're not handling the calls well. If we had a way to intake calls, and if there was a way to kind of train people up faster so they actually felt more confident and they weren't calling on the senior people to help them, that would be great. And if the esprit de corps was really up and excited, that would be great. I said, "Awesome." I said, "So what are you willing to do in order to resolve this?" And she said, well, I'm willing to come into your office and talk about it, and and I'm willing to kind of bring this forward to see how we can solve this together. And I am willing to look at our entire systems and how we can rework things. I said, "Awesome." And then I asked the next question, which is, well, what are you willing to not do in order to resolve this? And her immediate response was, I am not willing to live like it is right now. This is untenable. I will not stand for how it is. I said, great. Which led to the final question, the fifth question. And Tony Robbins has his way of languaging it. And that question is, how can you have a great time resolving this? Or my angle is like, how can you develop some new mastery as you work this? So I asked that question. So how could you have a great time figuring this out? Is there some level of mastery that you could develop here? Again, there was a long pause, and she said, we have some really creative people on staff. And maybe I could turn this over to some of our senior people, and they could create a really creative, fun training. Maybe we could take some time at the end of the day to explore what worked and what didn't work, and kind of tweak it as we go. Maybe there's a way we could just actually tell people right up front and saying we're so excited because the interest is so high in our programs that we really want to get to you to support you. Maybe we can have that as our, a way that people could, when they're on hold, that they could kind of get how actually excited we are. And we went on to brainstorm, and that meeting was amazing. And at the end, she was so pumped, and so was I. All from reframing, from catastrophe to, well, what's great about this? What's not perfect yet? What are you willing to do? And what are you willing to no longer do? And how can you have a great time doing it? Or is there some way you could create some mastery here? So, just to deconstruct these questions, of course, what's great about this problem is it's kind of stunning. But if you sit with the question, part of how inquiry works is you take the question and you just hang out. Hang out with it. And sometimes there's a very cool response. What's not perfect yet is a reframe that actually has you reflect on, well, what would be perfect? Again, it shifts your consciousness to a different frame. What are you willing to do? It helps to bring your attention toward action steps. And I find the fourth question, what are you no longer willing to do, to be really empowering? And quite often when I ask myself that question's got a lot of anger. And that anger is power. It's the line in the sand. I'm no longer willing to live this way. And the fifth question is challenging, but how could you have a great time resolving this? Or how could you develop some new mastery? I think a lot of us really have a sense of we want to develop more skill. We want to develop more mastery, and that can open up into creative brainstorming. So let me take you through this, if you like. And if you like, you can close your eyes, and you might just think of some problematic situation in your life. It doesn't have to be big. In fact, it might even be helpful to choose something that's kind of a mild irritant. So over the next 3 breaths, just take a few moments and reflect on a particular issue that feels sticky for you. And if you were to kind of describe this issue in one sentence, how would you describe it? I'll offer these questions and give you a little bit of space. And again, the question is, you're dropping the question in and you're just noticing what arises out of that question. The first question is, what's great about this? Or what could be great about this issue? The second question, what is not perfect yet? What's not perfect yet? Question 3, what are you willing to do in order to resolve this? What are you willing to do? The next question, what are you no longer willing to do? And the next question, is there a sense of how you can have a great time resolving this? Or is there some new mastery that you could develop? How could you work toward resolving this in a way that's enlivening? You might now gently deepen your breath. When you're ready, you can open your eyes or feel free to remain with them closed. I hope this was helpful for you. And if it wasn't all tied up in a neat bow, just to trust that asking these questions can be a very powerful way of sort of shifting your perspective around it. And this is the practice of reframing. It's about moving outside the linear rational mind, asking yourself questions that sort of expand you beyond the fruit fly jar that you might be living in the moment. You know, we get so tight and so grim in our lives, and certainly these days, I tend to be there a lot. But this one poet had this wonderful reframe. And the poet said, sometimes it's helpful to take the 3,000-year view. When I think about the turmoil in this life right now, on this planet, in the context of 3,000 years, it's a potent inquiry. And for me, it sort of helps me to hold this and to sense how in the 3,000-year view, how do I want to be right now? And so we're a product of our conditioning. As little kids, what we saw modeled, what we were told reality was, we just sort of take it on. As I've shared before, it's like we're little hard drives with no virus protection. And a really interesting question is, let's just say your relationship to money. Is it any different than your parents' relationship to money? How much of their relationship to money have you absorbed, and how much are you living through that? And just a little glimpse into how our conditioning plays through our life. And there's a really interesting question that I find really helpful. For example, when I just think about money, both my parents were Depression kids. My father, when he was a little kid, his mother would bake bread and he and his sister would bike around town to sell it. And, they lived out of their garden and it was really, really tight. And there's a certain frugality that is part of my lineage that definitely plays through. And I'm grateful for it, but it's also limiting. It's also limiting. But the question I love is when I think about just that little conditioning. Who am I without that imprint? And when you think of the conditioning in your life, think of the impact that your primary caretakers had on you. And just for a moment, ask yourself this question. Who are you without that imprint? I love that question. It opens up new possibilities, and it opens up a very interesting state that many people report, which is when they ask themselves, who am I without that imprint of, that overlay of my relationship with my dad? Their response is, I don't know. I just don't know. And part of the practice is to embrace that. Because that I don't know is actually this doorway to the field of infinite possibility. I don't know who I am if I'm really okay as I am. I don't know who I am if I'm actually a good person. I don't know who I am if I'm smart. Our conditioning sets the frame for what you think is possible. Sometimes it's really helpful to look at that conditioning and to really explore how it's playing out. So I had a dog. He's been gone a long time now, maybe, over 10 years. He lived about 15 years, and he was an amazing dog. He was what's called a Royal Standard Poodle, which is a gigantic poodle. At his prime, as his fighting weight, he was about 115 pounds. He was really big and super strong and very alpha. So his name, his name was Hakuna Matata, which means, translation is no worries. I thought, that would be a really good name for a dog who's like run off and you don't know when he's coming back, just to be yelling, no worries, no worries. And his favorite thing in the world was, unfortunately, hunting and killing things. He had a very, very strong prey drive. And I remember when he was a pretty young pup, we were hiking in New England. It was in the mountains. It was like in February. It was cold and crisp and clear. There's this fresh snowfall overnight, like light, puffy snow just covering everything. And he was off leash, racing around. I could hear him up on the ridge, and didn't hear anything for a while. And I heard this noise, and I looked to my right, and these 3 deer burst through these hollies. There was this explosion of light, of snow crystals in the morning, the sun, these 3 deer that were just for a moment suspended in air and then off and running. And about 1.5 seconds later, there was another explosion through the bushes, and there's Hakuna suspended in air, surrounded by ice crystals, his tongue hanging out of his mouth with a look of absolute joy in his eyes. He was a handful. And I remember hiking with him once, and there were some deer who were kind of running off a little in the distance. I looked at him and I said, "Don't you dare." And he looked at me and he looked at the deer. And he looked at me and he looked at the deer. And I could just see in his brain, it was like pack mode, hunt mode, pack mode, hunt mode, pack mode, gone, hunt mode. That's a pretty good description of us. We have these energies inside. Something wants it, something isn't so sure. Do I play it safe? Do I take a risk? You're probably familiar with the marshmallow experiment where they take little kids and they say, they're seated at a table, they put a marshmallow in front of them, they say, you can have this marshmallow now, but I just need to tend to something. I'll be back in a few minutes. And if you can wait, I'll give you 2 marshmallows. It was very interesting. It was an experiment in delayed gratification. And some of the kids were like, they just couldn't stand it. And they just ate the marshmallow. Other kids were able to wait. And they did follow-up studies, and they found that the little kids who had the capacity to delay gratification tended to be much more successful in academics and successful in accomplishment and so forth in life. They're kind of able to kind of overcome that immediate need for gratification. So there's this direct connection between your capacity to delay gratification for something better and success in life. At least that's my possibly distorted understanding of it. And so it's very, very helpful when you're really caught in a problematic situation to really pause and experiment. What would it feel like inside if I just ate the damn marshmallow? What would it feel like inside if I waited a little bit longer and had 2 marshmallows? So you might even ask yourself, if you went to bed early tonight, or maybe have an espresso and watch a movie, what would the outcome be? Now, for some of us, like, oh, okay, I'll go to bed, I'll feel good, I'll have a great day tomorrow. And someone else might be like, oh God, it would be so much fun to just get a little lit up and watch a movie. So here, when you're in a problematic situation, and kind of the point I'm getting to is, it can be very helpful to kind of reflect on what we could call cause and effect, or karma. Karma is really this basic rule that whatever you do has some effect down the road. And again, when we can shift from impulsivity to reflection, and we touched on this a little bit last week, when you have a problem to solve, what are the options? And it can be really, really helpful to kind of break it down. Are there 2 options, 3 options? And allow yourself to really sense. If you choose one and ask yourself, okay, if I do that, what's the short-term outcome and what's the long-term outcome? If I didn't do that, what's the short-term outcome and the long-term outcome? And so much of this is this reflection on cause and effect can be so helpful. When you realize, usually where there is a problematic situation and you're confused, there's something inside that wants one thing and something inside that's not so sure or doesn't want it. Teasing that out can be really, really helpful. For example, someone who really had a decision to make around taking a wild trip overseas or taking that week to be with their parents, kind of their aging parents, and really caught because something inside really wanted to cut free and just have an adventure. Something inside wanted to be responsible and not to let their parents down and to be there for them. That was a real problem for him. How did he sort that out? Part of it is reflecting on the unmet need. And he realized that if he went to be with his parents for a week, he really had a need to cut loose. He had a need to have fun. He had a need to have an adventure. And if he blew that off and just went to Bali and had the adventure, well, he really had a need to feel like he was being responsible to his parents. That he wanted them to know that he really did care. And for him, when he realized that part of the problem that he was wrestling with was that could he possibly get his needs met in either one of those cases? And so for him, he realized that to go on that adventure, what he really needed was to let his parents know that he really cared about them and to assure them that he was going to be there for him. So he had a conversation with them, and they were completely cool with it. They really wanted to have an adventure, and they wanted to hear about it. And so he actually realized that what would sort of meet their needs and his needs was to send them little updates and send them photos. And they actually had a really wonderful kind of vicarious experience with him. So it's an interesting reflection when you're in a problematic situation. What are the needs that you have? Something wants it, something's not so sure. And if you can begin to name those unmet needs, you may find some kind of resolution. And again, all of this at its very, very base has this accessing this quality of mindfulness. And again, I really don't like the word mindfulness. I much prefer non-judging awareness. It's about opening to new information. It's about getting outside of the linear judging mind and outside of your conditioning. So sometimes problems can be solved by changing your state. You just simply explore how you can shift your attention, shift your state that's more open, more filled with ease. Sometimes it's really helpful to take this stance of the witness, the observer. Just let go of judgment and open up to new information. Sometimes it's really helpful to explore some questions that can help you to reframe what's happening and how you're relating to it. So what's great about this issue? What's great about this problem? What can I learn about this? What's the opportunity for mastery here? What's not perfect yet? What am I willing to do? What am I no longer willing to do? Sometimes these questions can get you outside of the box of the comparing and judging mind and open you up to what we could call the intuitive mind, too. Sometime in this mindfulness tradition called Buddhi mind. And Buddhi mind is awake mind. It's this quality of awareness that is unfettered by fear, it's unfettered by desire, it's unfettered by hatred, it's unfettered by confusion. The doorway is relaxation, calming, arriving, taking the stance of the observer. It's about moving from the linear mind to what Deepak Chopra describes so beautifully as this field of infinite possibility. You can't get there through the mind. It really requires that you cultivate a powerful shift. What I didn't have time to get to here is what I kind of think of as the ultimate reframe question. And I'm going to talk about that next time. And it has to do with awareness itself. I'll give you a little taste. My friend Anam Tubden, we've led a number of retreats together. He's a really wonderful, wonderful, sweet teacher. I encourage you to check him out. He wrote a beautiful book. The title of the book is No Self, No Problem. When we're tightly bound, trying to figure out what's the right thing to do, when you are connected to a tightly bound sense of self, inevitably your options are limited. Part of this practice of mindfulness, of accessing non-judging awareness, of asking questions that open up the frame of your perspective is about you're mucking around playing with that sense of self. The tightly bound self for these moments gets suspended. And that's what allows you to shift out of linear mind into intuitive mind, into Buddhi mind. So no self, no problem is a radical, radical practice. And next time, we'll explore a little more about these questions that actually move you from the world of duality. And problem solving in the realm of duality it's healthy. We all got to navigate our lives. But it's also really powerful to open to these wider questions. It's a radical, radical act. We'll explore more. So in these final minutes, you might like to close your eyes. And you might slow down your breath. Notice where you feel the breath on the inside right now. And just sense what it's like to tune into this frequency, if you will, of non-judging awareness. This quality of Buddhi mind, or the intuitive mind. Just sense for a moment who you are in the absence of wanting, of aversion or judgment. Your capacity to be both intimately, deeply relaxed, and at the same time alert, awake to everything that's changing and letting things be. I'm going to offer you a question. And with the question, allow yourself to be really quiet inside and just notice what organically arises. When you sense all that's changing in your life right now, when you sense this quality of the awakened quality of the Buddhi mind, non-judging awareness, what advice do you have to give yourself? And if you were to follow that, not perfectly, not all the time, but if you were to incline your mind toward that, what would that be like? What would that feel like? As you're ready, you can gently deepen the breath. When you're ready, you can gently open your eyes. Thank you so much for your time and your attention. I truly hope this was helpful. May you be guided by that quality of non-judging awareness. And may you feel this quality of presence and the capacity to pause, to ask yourself, what's happening right now? Can I let it be? How does this moment want me to be with it? That quality of inner listening can be transformational. Blessings in your practice. Thank you again.